Assalamu alaikum, friends. Today we have a special edition of Matrix Media with Arif Ansar Sahab, who is based in Washington. He's the chief analyst at think tank at strategic advisory forum called PoliTact, and they're trying to decipher what's happening in the world, the emerging trends, and the latest developments, trying to interpret them. And welcome, Arif Sahab. And the first question we would like to ask is about the latest context between the United States and China. There have been a lot of tensions that began with the tariff wars between China and US as former President Donald Trump mounted this tariff war. So there's a lot of tension, bickering between the two countries. And now there seems to be some resumption of context between the two countries, particularly also in the context of the uh, Russian aggression or invasion of Ukraine. Now, I would like to ask, what do you think? Is it really a sign of some sort of détente between China and the United States?
Thank you for having me, Imtiaz, first. And going to your question, this is a process of engagement. I wouldn't say that this is some kind of a détente or a change of policy per se, but it's a continuation of U.S. policy to engage and keep the communication going. As you know, there's a lot happening between U.S. and China and U.S. and Russia. A lot of forces going back and forth in the Pacific as well, and experts and analysts have warned that there is high probability of some kind of inadvertent incidents. Some of them have happened in the past as well. So this is kind of the ongoing communication, keeping engaged, trying to understand each other's intent, and so there is no risk of incident or further deterioration of ties, of important ties between US and China. We all know what's happening in Ukraine, and that's unfolding. US and Russia and the Europe, how that crisis is unfolding, and China has obviously sided with Russia on that as far as diplomatic support. And that has worried the US as well. And that communication has been continuing as well. And as you may have read, the recent contact between the Chinese foreign minister and Anthony Blinken they did talk about that aspect as well. And US had in the past, recently, when the crisis unfolded, alerted that Chinese should not militarily or otherwise support Russia. So that's one side of it. You also know that Trump had a policy, they had imposed tariffs and all of that. And there was hope when President Biden came in that maybe there is a reversal and revisit of that. So from the Chinese side, that there is hope, and they continue to emphasize that there is misperception in the US about China, and that should not continue or be promoted because that could affect. Obviously, we have kind of a reversal of roles economically. China is championing globalization and free trade, and US has its reservations, and the European allies, in the sense of who's benefiting or who benefited recently from all the free trade. And so we have a lot of things that are being revisited and I guess rethought the way we were used to things to happen economically or trade or supply chains, and especially the energy gas supplies. All of those are being, as you know, revisited. So I would say that it's a continuation and not necessarily some rethink or change of policy.
But would you think that this latest re-engagement has been necessitated by what is happening in Ukraine and the way China has basically put its weight, not necessarily put its weight, but it's sort of indirectly sided with Russia and also increased its oil and gas purchases from Russia. So do you think this is something that has cautioned and alarmed not only the United States, but also the rest of its allies.
No, it has, and that's through the process of engagement that those messages are flowing back and forth. If you remember, last year there was a meeting in Alaska where Anthony Blinken and the Chinese delegation foreign minister met, and that was kind of a public event. Some of it came out as well, and it was pretty aggressive, and the response from China was pretty aggressive as well. Um, so I think it is kind of what you're saying that as the at that time there was no Ukraine had not blown up like it has now, and China and Russia have their own strategic partnership, uh, that they had reiterated before the Ukraine conflict ignited. So there is continuing alarm and conveying of the message that don't do that. It's going to have consequences. I mean, in terms of the Chinese and the one China policy, obviously Taiwan. That's another one of the concerns as it relates to the Pacific. Uh, as you know, that is China going to take something of a similar step? It's Chinese red line when it comes to Taiwan. So it's continual reappraisal and understanding the intent and clarifying so there is no misunderstanding resulting to something that nobody wants.
But do you feel sitting in Washington from your vantage point that there is a considerable contradictions in the U.S. policy focused on Ukraine? Like on the one hand, one of its strategic allies, India, has ratcheted up its gas and petrol purchases from Russia. On the other hand, the United States and its allies, they expect China and other countries like Pakistan, like many other Middle Eastern countries which need the gas or cheaper petrol, not to buy from Russia. So do you think this contradiction is discernible was in Washington's political circles?
Imtiaz, it's more so the perspective has changed. Has become the great power rivalry. So that's the terminology that is prominent now in Washington and in the articles and the journals, etc. That's the perspective. Uh, and there is a sentiment that U.S. had remained not focusing on these great powers or adversaries, emerging adversaries when it was distracted in the war against terror or war against extremism. So at some point it said that we have to focus on these emerging powers. Uh, so when we look at from that perspective, then everything is being done to what follows. If that's the perspective, I'm not saying this is the most useful way. We've been there before in history. We have seen what has happened as we went through that road. So the question is, equally there is opinion alternatively that we've been down this road. Do we want to go down this road, etc.? But when you play that game, then these things happen. So, and unfortunately, the more economically strong countries, they have more leeway to, flexibility and etc. that is being afforded to them, and weaker countries are having a very difficult time surviving. And if history is any lesson, they will have increasing tussles and tectonic shifts being pulled into different directions if this continues. And that's unfortunate, but that if we are to look at from that balance of power, spheres of influence, the Cold War, the domino theory, then this is comes with that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, this brings me, yeah, so this brings me to the question on the latest G20 summit, the latest NATO summit, and preceded by another summit last year in which all these big countries promised this new initiative, build back a better world, and now they have announced another $600 billion. The entire attempt, whether it's the G20 countries, G7 summit, or the NATO countries, seems to be wooing, baiting Asian and African countries into the Western fold in order to nudge them away from the Belt and Road Initiative that China has launched, and it has undertaken several dozens of projects in Asian and African countries. Now, do you think, as a strategist, whether this will work the way the US-led West wants it to work?
That's what we alluded to earlier. Spheres of influence, and then accompanied by supply chains, and more importantly, the energy supply lanes. And like you mentioned, there was a criticism of US and the West, EU, that when China was extending BRI, or and its tributaries in different parts of the world, that had not provided an alternative. That okay. Are people really going to China because they really love Chinese political, economic, and structure it has to offer, or is it because they have these developmental needs and development needs which are being offered by China? So they say, okay, we are gonna, and that has led to the initiatives that you mentioned, and the which I think, if I remember correctly, it's Indo-Pacific Economic Initiative as well. What is being called, and then associated with that some other risks that are kind of now paralleling the BRI and what it had to offer. Now, how does this ultimately unfold? And the question becomes, if it is going to continue, what is this new Cold War going to look like? And because after all, we were globalizing, and people still talk about global village, and this is not that village that was being envisioned after World War II. As far as my studies reveal theoretically, that we wanted to avoid extreme nationalism that had led to what had happened, and the solution was economic interdependence, like the European Union model, that if we have reliance on one another, then we are not going to want to have conflicts. So this kind of approach is begging the question again, that which road are we going down? Are we putting that mantra to rest now, and saying that no, it's sphere of influence. If you're on my side, then you buy energy from me, you do trade with me, and you don't do anything with the part. And then what it does to the rest of the world, globalization, and so on and so forth. So that's less clear. But as far as the Indo-Pacific Economic Initiative, that is providing, or supposed to be providing, an alternative, that people are going to China because they were offering initiatives money and we were not. And so if we have something, then people will be attracted towards us.
Well, thank you very much, Arif Saab, for your insights.